Hello, students. This is the video lecture for Chapter 15 from the Mendich textbook. This is the first part. This is going to just be about law, and I'm not going to go into full detail about things. I'm just going to give sort of like the tip of the iceberg. So maybe you heard some terms that you've never heard before, or maybe explain a few things that you've heard, didn't know how they work. Anyway, read the textbook. Textbook has more detail. What's stated here is pretty clear. It's pretty absolute, right? If you want to take a literal interpretation of it, Congress will make no law. Congress will make no law, right? Remember that. I'm going to come back to that. Congress will make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. What this means is that it applies to the government. And many people don't know that. Many students don't know that. It doesn't limit private companies and what they can do. So if I wanted to wear an obscene t-shirt into Disney, I always get confused. One's in Florida, one's in California, Disney World, Disneyland, whatever. You know what I'm talking about, the one in Anaheim. If I want to wear a vulgar t-shirt, Mickey Mouse doing something obscene to Minnie Mouse, and Disney says, you can't wear that shirt in here, sir. It's going to offend people. It's against our rules. I can't cry and scream First Amendment violation. Disney's a private company. They can do whatever they want, right? Can't wear an obscene shirt on a plane. If a plane says can't wear that, they can do what they want. What it means is that the courts cannot come in and arrest me for wearing that shirt because, maybe it's protected by the First Amendment and maybe it doesn't technically meet the standards of obscenity. Mickey Mouse doing something gross to Minnie Mouse. So it doesn't apply to private companies. It only applies to the government. Maybe you think that's wrong. Maybe you think that's right. That's a whole other issue. I'm just stating what the fact is. Is it legal? Now, this is going back a few years, but I think hopefully the topic is still clear in y'all's mind. Was it legal for social media platforms like Twitter and Trump to ban certain individuals, including uh, you know, the top elected official in the United States? Was it okay for them to do that? Yeah, it absolutely was okay for them to do that because, again, like I just said, the First Amendment applies to the government. It doesn't apply to private companies. And when you sign up for the different social media platforms, you click that, terms of agreement or user terms, whatever. No one reads that stuff. Now, the graphic here shows how courts interpret freedom of expression and issues that deal with the First Amendment. Again, the literal terms of the First Amendment are no law. That's the stated term, no law. But we have many laws, especially when it comes to nudity and protecting children, issues of national security. There's also rules about accurate information in ads. I mean, if the First Amendment says no law, then I should be able to come on TV and advertise any product I want and say whatever I want, even if it's false. No, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. So we have many laws. We have many laws limiting freedom of expression. On the left side, the arrow says something gets little or no First Amendment protection if it does not serve the public good very much. The textbook talks about this case, Candyland. You should read the textbook. Don't rely just on me to spoon feed you information. Read the textbook. This case where a local government, it was either a state government or a local government, says, women have to cover themselves up a little bit, tiny bit, tiny bit, can't be totally nude. According to the First Amendment, you should be allowed to be totally nude. That was your First Amendment right. But the court said, it really doesn't benefit the public that much. We're not helping the public. Some people might be entertained by this, but it's not serving the public good in some broad sense. So it's okay to limit the First Amendment because you're really not helping the country or the population by allowing this stuff. However, on the other side, the right side of the graphic, you have the Watergate investigation. President and other elected officials engaging in flat out illegal activity. This is in the early 1970s. The illegal activity probably goes back to the 60s. Exposing wrongdoing on behalf of the government is in the public good because then it helps correct the government and kind of pull people back in line. So the court said, if you are really serving the public good, if maybe politicians are doing something they shouldn't be, then we're going to give full First Amendment protection to that stuff because it's helping the country, is helping people. So we want to allow that information out, even if it's embarrassing. Okay. So that's what this graphic represents. Himes v. Sullivan, you should be familiar with this case. It's a very, very landmark case when it comes to defamation. Defamation is the broad legal term for when you put out false information about someone that damages their reputation or damages their livelihood. They can't earn an income because you've destroyed their reputation. Libel, technically, libel is something that's written or published or transmitted over the airwaves. Slander is spoken. We tend to use the term defamation or libel to cover all this stuff. People really don't use the term slander very much. Anyway, okay, this case goes back to an ad from 1960, raising funds for MLK Jr., that's Martin Luther King Jr., and there were some information about the public safety commissioner for Montgomery, Alabama. The information was false. Some of the information was false. This individual, his name was never actually given in the ad. His name was never given in the ad, but this individual felt like enough information was given about him that he was identified. He felt defamed. The court said, yeah, there were some mistakes that were made, but the mistakes were minor mistakes, and the mistakes were done accidentally. The mistakes were not done based on malice, and now we have the absolute malice standard. What that means is, if you publish false information about a public figure, and there's a legal definition of what is a public figure, an elected public official is a public figure. If you publish false information about a public figure, that's okay. The First Amendment's going to protect you. To get in trouble, you had to have published that information with absolute malice, which means the journalist knew the information was wrong and proceeded to publish it anyway. Okay. That's a very high standard to meet if you're a public figure. But if someone knows the information is wrong and publishes it anyway, then they're going to be in trouble. This is the issue with the Fox Dominion case. Dominion Voting was alleging that the information that went out over Fox Cable defamed them, and that Fox knew it was wrong, and that Fox acted in malice. And Dominion had enough evidence, overwhelming amount of evidence, to prove that there was malice. There was overwhelming evidence that Fox knew what they were doing was wrong. And right before the case went to trial, Fox settled for $787 million. And it relates to this malice standard. Fox knew they were going to lose because what they were doing was so egregiously over the top wrong, they were going to lose. Hustler magazine versus Falwell. This is mentioned in the textbook. If you are not familiar with adult magazines, and maybe you shouldn't be, right? If you're not familiar, Hustler is pretty extreme. I don't even know if it's still around. Certainly when I was a kid, it was around. It was extreme. Playboy was a little like, maybe like a hard R rating, a little bit soft core, if you know what I mean. Hustler is like all the way, just like totally extreme. There's an ad saying Jerry Falwell, famous televangelist, he would go on TV spreading Christianity and also raising money. People attacked him. They said, you're just kind of a hypocrite. You're just trying to raise money. This ad states that he had sexual relations with his mother in an outhouse. Pretty horrible thing to say about someone. The courts found that Hustler was not guilty of defamation, not guilty of libel, because there was no malice, and it was clearly a parody. It was clearly a joke. Campari had a series of ads at the time about the first time you drank Campari. Hustler's doing a parody of the Campari first time ad, making an attack on Falwell. But again, the court said, look, anyone with their right mind would know that this was a joke. And if you're reading Hustler, you kind of know what you're getting, and that there was no actual credible defamation going on. But that is mentioned in the textbook. Snyder v. Phelps. I'm going to put a little clip. I don't want the lectures to be too long, but I'm going to put a little clip of a news story here. The Westboro Baptist Church used to protest, maybe they still do, I guess, maybe they still do, funerals for soldiers. I cannot imagine a situation in which I would want to protest the funeral of a soldier. I just can't imagine that. Even if I disagree with certain actions of foreign policy, I'm not going to protest the funeral of a soldier. That's horrible, horrible.
They're shocking.
God showed his wrath to thee.
They're cruel and outrageous, and for most Americans, simply beyond the pale.
Thank God for dead soldiers.
but should they be against the law? What the members of the tiny Westboro Baptist Church in Topeka, Kansas do at the funerals of fallen soldiers and Marines seems to have violated an almost universal sense of basic human decency. And they know it, and they're proud of it.
Well, you seem to have crossed a line for just about everyone.
You know what? How good that is for you to say that?
That's good.
Yes, because this nation has crossed every line of God's standards.
Well, Marine Lance Corporal Snyder, his funeral is protested, picketed. His father protests. This is a horrible thing. I'm mourning the loss of my son. I cannot imagine that. That must be very, very trying time, And then you're mourning the loss of your son, and you have people screaming that, he deserved to die. He tries to sue, and the court said it was okay. It was okay. As offensive as it was, Westboro had a right to do that. There's a couple limits to free speech, different standards that the courts use. Over 100 years ago, there was the clear and present danger test. If your speech was a clear and present danger, you could be punished for it. In this case, it was an individual protesting the draft for World War I. That was loosened. The clear and present danger was thought to be too easy to punish people. So now it's the imminent lawless action test, that your words need to be very, very specific and advocate imminent lawless action. The Brandenburg, Ohio case is about a Klan leader who was saying some really, really horrible things about people of color. I mean, you can imagine, he was in the Klan, you can imagine what he was saying. But he wasn't naming specific people or giving a specific call to action of we need to do this now. He was speaking more broadly in generalizable terms of here's what we should do to these people, but it wasn't like this one individual tomorrow, 5 o'clock, let's do this. That second kind of thing would presumably meet the imminent lawless action test. But what Brandenburg said, the court said was okay. Depending on papers, this is in the textbook. You can read the textbook. Very, very embarrassing information about Vietnam comes out. It's revealed. A guy named Daniel Ellsberg leaks the information to the New York Times and the Washington Post that the US government, the president, and the Pentagon had been lying to the public for years. Nixon was the president at the time. Nixon was the one who got caught in Watergate, but it had been going on way before Nixon. Troops were dying and we were lying to the public. Oh, things are going great. Things are not so bad. Even inventing and coming up with false reasons why we should be fighting in Vietnam. It was based on misinformation. The courts found that it was okay, and that the New York Times and the Washington Post had a right to publish presumably secret government documents because it helped the public interest. The public needed to know what was going on. Freedom of Information Act, because in theory, we have a democratically elected government. This is the theory, so that people who work in government work for us, the citizens. They work for us. So we should know what they're doing. So anything the government does, any kind of meetings that they do, you ought to be able to find that out. And the way you do that is by filing a Freedom of Information Act request, known by its acronym FOIA, F-O-I-A, FOIA. You can file a FOIA request to find out what was discussed by the state legislature, or what were the politicians doing. You presumably could even get access to people's emails if they are government employees, and certainly if they're using government computers, you get access to their emails. Now, the government and different institutions have many, many ways of wiggling out of providing. They can delay the information. They can claim national security. There's different rules you could use and provisions to get out of a FOIA request. But in theory, it's supposed to be open, transparent government. So you should know when someone said, I filed a FOIA request, that's what they're talking about. They're trying to get information about what the government is doing. And again, this is only for public government institutions, or even San Diego State, because we are a government institution. You can't file a FOIA request for Disney, okay, because they're private. Cameras in the courtroom. Do we allow cameras in the courtroom? When you do allow cameras in the courtroom, it becomes a huge media spectacle. Here's a headline. This is from 2023 about this big case. I think it was South Carolina. And this says the media spectacle is good for business, right? Food trucks are doing good business. Here's more. I deliberately tried to stay away from this trial, deliberately tried to stay away. It was such a huge media spectacle. On the one hand, you could say you need to allow cameras in because a public trial should be truly public and people have a right to know. And what is the government trying to hide by keeping cameras out? But then on the other hand, you could say when you put in too much reporters, too much press, the lawyers and maybe even the judge are now performing for the public. They're not actually trying to deal with the issue at hand. They're performing for the public, and it sort of unfairly taints the whole process. And if false information or negative information is revealed in court and it's broadcast around the world and there's a mistrial and we need to get new jurors, we can't get new jurors because everyone saw the first trial, which was done incorrectly. So different courts have different ways of interpreting it. The U.S. Supreme Court is very, very famously against cameras. The U.S. Supreme Court says no cameras, no TV cameras. Different states, different jurisdictions, different judges have different policies. So that's why it varies. Sometimes you can see trials on TV and sometimes you cannot. Okay. And it just varies based on jurisdiction and what the judge wants to allow. And I think there are valid arguments for and against. Now, the equal time, there's two things here. Don't get confused because they're similar. Equal time rule is selling airtime to political candidates. Write that down in your notes. Equal time rule is selling airtime to political candidates. If I'm a local TV station, someone's running for governor, I like this person, I support their political party, I'll give them a discounted rate. Someone from another political party who I don't like, I say, I'll sell you airtime at a quadruple rate. That's not fair. That gives different people different access to the airwaves. So that is why the equal time rule exists, and it is about selling airtime. It is different from the fairness doctrine. It is different from the fairness doctrine. Okay, now what the fairness doctrine states is, I could do a whole 40 minutes, I could do a whole hour on the fairness doctrine. Okay, so I'm just going to try and boil it down as quickly as I can. Radio and television broadcasters used to operate exclusively by using the public airwaves. Electromagnetic frequencies naturally exist. You could use those frequencies to send information to people. If a TV station, for example, is using a particular frequency, let's say channel 4, no one else can use channel 4. So let's say NBC is channel 4, just hypothetically, NBC is channel 4. If NBC is channel 4, no one else can use channel 4. Therefore, NBC needs to operate in the public interest, meaning they need to provide information that's going to help the public. And if they're covering a controversial issue, they need to cover both sides of the issue. Okay. This rule applied to radio and television that were using the public airwaves. It never applied to cable because cable looks like regular TV, but it comes into your house through a literal cable or fiber optics or a coaxial cable or something. You don't have the same kind of spectrum issue. I'm going to come back to this in a few weeks. Don't worry if it's confusing now. I'm going to come back to this. But you don't have that same kind of spectrum scarcity. Therefore, the fairness doctrine never applied to cable, and it never applied to streaming because there was no streaming in the 1970s and 80s. The technology didn't even exist. So the fairness doctrine was only for radio and television stations that were using the public airwaves, and it was only for controversial issues. It was phased out under President Reagan in the 1980s. Okay, why was it phased out? Well, one reason was it's difficult to establish what is a controversial issue. But if a scientist says cigarette smoking is bad, causes lung cancer, does that station then need to put on an advocate from the tobacco company to say that smoking is good for you and that science is fake science? Seatbelts. New study, again, this is decades ago when seatbelts weren't a law. New study says people wear seatbelts, save your life, wear a seatbelt. That is an invasion of my privacy, my body, my space. I can do what I want. Don't tell me, mean government, don't tell me. If you do a story saying seatbelts are good, do you now need to do a story saying seatbelts are bad? And this caused a lot of confusion in the 1980s. So they got rid of the fairness doctrine. And today, if you tried to bring it back, again, it wouldn't apply to cable. It wouldn't apply to streaming unless it were updated. Everything is controversial. Everything is controversial now. If I talk to my parents and I say, oh, the weather is very hot, we don't believe in global warming, the weather's fine. Communications Decency Act There is a section called Section 230. Look at the words on the right. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. What that means is that social media platforms or internet service providers are not legally responsible for the information that is posted by users. Twitter is not legally responsible for the stuff that's posted on Twitter. Okay. Twitter has rules and regulations, or at least used to. But if I go on Twitter, make a death threat against someone, which I shouldn't be doing, or make a death threat, that person wants to come after me. They can't go after Twitter. They can come after me for saying it, but they can't go after Twitter. The reason that the courts did this because they wanted to allow the internet to grow. This goes back to the 90s. Okay. They wanted the internet to grow. Maybe situation has changed. Maybe technology has changed. Maybe we need to get rid of Section 230. There are some court cases going on right now. I may have to update this, who knows, next semester or next year. There's some what looks like comic boxes back there. Dear Professor Arsenault, I'm very curious what's in those comic boxes. Would you please show us? That's what I'm going to do. Okay. If you think comic books are geeky, if you think I'm weird, if you think this is a waste of time and money, stop now. Okay. There's no more play pause it questions. Stop now. I don't know who you are. I won't be hurt. But if you're cool, if you're smart, if you like to appreciate the beauty and weirdness of all the artistry of the past, and if you think it's fun to collect things, hang out for 2 minutes. I'll show you what's in the comic boxes. Okay, this is like the Marvel post-credit scene, you know? Okay, there's no more play pause it questions here. There's an Office Lego set. That's, I think that's the Shumagorath from the Multiverse of Madness. That's a Lego set. The Lego set calls it something other than the Shumagorath. Lego set's wrong. That thing is called the Shumagorath in the comic books. Okay, here we have Daredevil #1. And then we have Daredevil #2. I'm trying to get issues #1 to 300 of Daredevil. I'm trying to get a complete run. And then here's 2 I got recently. What is this? Daredevil. This is Daredevil #5. The corner is cut out. This is not, if I were to get this thing professionally graded, it wouldn't grade very high. But the lower issue Daredevils are worth quite a bit. This is the yellow suit. And then we have Daredevil #6. This one cost twice as much as #5 because the corner is not ripped out. I just put a note there saying where and when I got it. Golden Apple Comics on Melrose in Los Angeles. And #7. So now this is the first time that Daredevil, I got this off Facebook. Yeah, someone sold this to me from a Facebook group. This is the first appearance of the red suit, and that is the Submariner. So yeah, issue 7 has the first red suit. I'm very happy about that. Again, this is all Daredevil. This I think goes up to what's the last issue here? That is issue 165. Oh my God, I don't have a board in this one. What the hell are you doing? You don't have a board in there. Okay, and then yeah, and then this is the higher issue Daredevils. I think I also got Deadman. Maybe got Deadman in there. And then this, the other thing I collect, Daredevil's my #1 thing. The other thing I'm really into is Star Trek. The Gold Key Star Trek. This is the old Star Trek. Yeah. These are started coming out in the late 60s and in the 1970s. I'm trying to get all 62. I think it's 62 or 61. This is a really, really crap condition. I have two copies of #8. They're both in crap condition. But yeah, there are some awesome covers. These Star Treks have incredible covers. Yeah, I love the original Star Trek. Anyway, that's that. That's your geeky professor. Okay. All right, that's it. Done.